welcoming all. It's good to see you here. It's good to see you drive. The last briefing we had torrential rains. People were coming in wet and everything else. So we've ordered the weather this time. So it looks pretty good out there. What an exceptional day. My name is Joe Lamantia. I'm Senior Vice President of Business Development for Psychological Associates. It's my pleasure to introduce this session today. Can you hear?
I hear you.
Okay, I'll have to speak up, so if I'm screaming up here, please bear with me. The first thing that I want to do is tell you that in your gray folder on your desk, you'll find a number of things, one of which is an agenda. You'll also find a bio for Claire, some information about Psych Associates, which you probably don't need, but perhaps you do. And there is a feedback form that will ask you at the end of the session to give us some candid feedback about these briefings. We're offering a number of them, both on an HR level and a CEO level for St. Louis, as well as New York and Chicago. So once again, welcome today. The briefing, which is selecting exceptional performers, obviously is a very hot topic today. A lot of my work takes me to New York and takes me around the country, and I don't know of a topic that's in more vogue today than this one. So I think we're going to find some very, very interesting things today, and we have some exceptional speakers. Let me introduce, first of all, Doug Koch, Senior Vice President for Brown Shoe. Doug was telling me that even though his experience in human resources goes back 26 years, that he started in interviewing even before then when he was a junior at Seton Hall. At that time, he helped with the recruitment, and at 19 years old was interviewing, so he's got a lot of experience looking for exceptional talent. Doug also obviously is on the Strategic Council for Brown Shoes, resides half the time in St. Louis and half the time in Madison, Wisconsin. He has had experience in the past with a number of companies, including American Retail Group, the Sports Authority, and Macy's Department Stores. I'm sure that we're going to have an exceptional presentation from Doug this morning. In addition, my colleague, Claire Bramlet, Senior Vice President, who has tremendous background in assessment, and more recently, of course, with the way that the market goes, selection, management, and all of those things that are important in choosing exceptional talent. So without further ado, I will be back about 10 minutes before for the close. There'll be some questions and answers at the end. Without further ado, let me introduce Claire Bramlett.
Good morning, everyone. Doug and I truly appreciate your being with us this morning, and it's great to see so many familiar faces as well as unfamiliar faces. I have found in working with Doug Koch over the last couple of years to be one of the very best in terms of identifying and hiring exceptional talent. So I'm so pleased that he's able to be with us today. When we were thinking about this presentation, what might be helpful in a short time span, I thought it would be useful to hear about a specific business case, a particularly impressive and I think compelling challenge that he was faced with about a year and a half ago, and how some very disciplined and thoughtful selection processes led to a great result. So we'll be having an opportunity to hear about that today. But as Joe was referencing, to achieve a competitive advantage in the marketplace, it truly requires not just good performers, but great performers. And hopefully some of the ideas we'll be sharing with you today will help you move in that direction. The objectives of our presentation this morning is, one is to review a method with you for selecting the best people. We'll be talking about how to bring objectivity to bear and identify the characteristics and the skills of individuals and how to align them with their needs. We're also going to be spending some time talking about an application of this method at a division of Brown Shoe Company, the one that I was just referencing a few minutes ago at Famous Footwear. And then, of course, we're going to leave some time to talk about your issues, respond to your questions, and maybe share some ideas with one another. The quest for talent is definitely a challenge. I think that anyone in this room probably understands how difficult it can be to find, attract, and hire great talent. But the bad news is it's becoming more difficult. And the reason for that is, in addition to the obvious, there are quantitative challenges on the horizon. The pool in some important areas is dwindling. So between the year 2000 and 2015, there will be 15% less managerial and executive level people between the ages, or a pool even for that, between the ages of 35 and 44. There are fewer women surging into the workforce, so we no longer have that phenomenon. Immigration is flattening. So there's a quantitative challenge in terms of the pool. In addition, there are qualitative challenges. Information. There's so much more information that we're required to be aware of, to stay on top of. More and more we're required to think about things globally. So the challenges are mounting us in terms of qualitative as well.
Can you all hear Clara right in the back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Terrific. Increasing your odds for success. While our main theme over the course of this presentation is to be thoughtful and disciplined in terms of your processes, certainly conducting thoughtful, disciplined interviews and related processes are important. As a matter of fact, we have been thinking about adding a briefing around good interviewing techniques and structured behavioral interviewing. So if that's something you'd like to know more about, please indicate that on your forms at the end of the day. We have noted in the literature, I've noted in working with my clients, that people are becoming more savvy in terms of their interview skills. So, good trend to see. In addition, doing good reference checking. As Doug and I were talking, though, that kind of data is becoming less and less useful.
If you can get a good reference, if you know the person or you can get a good reference, Dr. Lefton, that's the best way to figure out if you can get a good person. Okay? But the ability to get, as you all know, because many of you are doing this constantly, you can't get a good reference. You get statistics, you get half-truths, you get what our legal friends tell us we're allowed to give or not give, and references are wonderful, but as you know today, it's not something that we face. 20 years ago, we could get good references today.
That would be my experience as well. So what we're really talking about here is how to bring objective information to bear in terms of reaching informed decisions. What are some techniques? What are some ways to go about doing that? And that, what we're talking about today comes under the umbrella of assessment. I thought it might be useful to review a fairly recent meta-analysis that was done on different common methods for predicting success in the work environment. In the 80s, there was kind of the first huge meta-analysis that was done by Hunter and Hunter. And at that time, the kinds of tools we're talking about today surfaced as the strongest predictors of the kinds of behavior we're interested in the work environment. This is an updated version of that study, and what I have noticed is that while the kinds of methods we're talking about today remain far superior to others, the interview approach has increased in terms of this predictive validity. And again, I think it's because of the increased knowledge around how to conduct structured behavioral interviews and how to target them around your needs, the strategic intent of your organization, etc. But as you can see, there's a huge variability here in terms of commonly used methods for predicting success and the degree to which they are effective. In terms of pre-selection assessment, then, what are some of the foremost objectives, or the primary objectives? Well, one is to enhance that objectivity. We're trying to remove as much as possible from the decision-making process some of the negative effects of subjectivity. The bias of the interviewer, the bias of the interviewee, and to some extent how a person presents themselves in an interview. I know I have some biases around different characteristics and how a person presents himself and the inferences that I'll draw, and I have to be very careful about that. So the assessment data brings that objectivity to bear. Another foremost objective is, obviously, to choose the best people. So by pursuing assessment, not only does it encourage you to look at objective data about an individual and their strengths and weaknesses, but by virtue of conducting an assessment, it requires you to think about need in a very thoughtful way. And then to gain a competitive advantage by hiring high-performing contributors. Well, when we conduct an assessment and we talk through feedback with the individual who's making the hiring decisions or the HR contact there, a lot of times we'll talk about, okay, these are the must-haves, but in addition, what are some of the nice-to-haves, and what is this person's long-term potential? And is this a potentially high-performing contributor? Is this a high-potential individual? Because those are important things we can discern as well. What is it? Essentially, it's a process, and it's a process that, in terms of pre-selection assessment, that predicts job performance and job satisfaction by bringing to bear these objective methods and tools. The tools, in addition to being objective, are validated, and by that I mean they have demonstrated over time the ability to predict the skills and characteristics that are important in the work environment. There are many benefits to be derived from pre-selection assessment, and I have bulleted out a few for you today to mull over. One, that great objectivity around informed decision-making. So, you're not thinking in terms of your particular biases, what may have been some subjective considerations and reflecting on the predecessor, etc. Hopefully, too, you thought in terms of some of the costs of a bad hire. They're astronomical. This helps in terms of that. That's a benefit. It sets developmental agenda for individuals and for groups. So if a person goes through an assessment, you hire that individual, not only do you have a sense of the degree of fit, but you also have a sense of where does this person need to focus for their developmental opportunities. And also, if I'm seeing a trend here in our organization, what are some of the developmental imperatives for the entire organization? High potential individuals calls those out. I think that's a great benefit. Conforms other sources of data about a candidate. When we talk about assessment data, we'll reflect on how this person has come across their interviews today. How does the assessment data jive with that, and how does it not? Why would that be? What would be some of the reasons for that? And we're able to dig into the assessment data and come up with some reasons for that. Other benefits, you're able to establish company-specific norms. In other words, you know what your employees look like. What are their skills, characteristics, and abilities? What are some of the things that we've hired to in the past and trained toward in the past? It surfaces relevant data to building bench strength By focusing on developmental imperatives at the group level, you're able to think in terms of building that bench strength. And in making future hiring decisions, you're also able to think in terms of, okay, what do we need to think about in the future? How do we raise the bar with regard to our employees? Sustaining succession planning efforts, we've had some wonderful presentations around succession planning and using objective assessment data to help you make better decisions around succession and to plan for it very systematically. So you're able to look at objective data on potential successors, see where there are some issues, where there are some gaps, and then plan accordingly in terms of future hiring decisions, training, coaching, etc. And then helping align talent decisions with a strategic intent. You're going to hear a lot about that today when Doug is speaking to the brown shoe case for Ad Famous Footwear, because he spent a great deal of thought in terms of what was going to be required in the short term and the long term, and how to align those decisions that he was making and the suggestions that he was making around the chairman's strategic intent. The benefits to the candidates, sometimes you don't think about this, but it really does help them as well. They don't find themselves in a position that is not a good match for them in terms of their strengths and interests and preferences. Because the job-related measures are objective and fair, it puts everyone on an equal playing ground. Some people interview beautifully. They present themselves so well. And I know one of my biases is a person verbal, and if they engage me, I'm more likely to attribute all kinds of wonderful characteristics and skills to them. This puts people on an even playing ground and allows us to look at true skills and characteristics that will be important in the job under consideration. The individual is able to demonstrate strengths. Sometimes those don't show up in the way they present themselves. Sometimes it doesn't show up on a resume. Perhaps they haven't been challenged yet in terms of leadership, and you're able to look at leadership potential. And again, the opportunities around development are surfaced, so they're able to get a better sense. If I hold up this objective mirror, not only are where some of my strengths, but where do I need to focus to prepare myself for my long-term career objectives? Ensuring job relevancy. Now we're moving into how do we conduct an assessment? And I cannot tell you how important the things that you see bulleted up here are in conducting an effective assessment.
If I could add, Claire, to this. A lot of what Claire has on this slide is the prep before you get involved in the conversation with individuals. And when we were talking about this slide a couple of days ago, I said this is really, if I was to preach to anything, all of us here, and you'd all, I think, would agree, the preparation is critical. And the way that some of my friends who are here today and I discuss this is that first you got to know the company. And when I say you got to know the company, you got to understand what the platform of the company is, what the goals of the company are currently today and aspirational. Where is the company going? What does it do? What does it hope to do? What the platform is. And the second that I talk to is that you have to understand the job itself. What are you looking for in the job? What does that job have to do for the company? How is it going to support the mission that you just had conversation? How is it going to support what aspirationally you want to make happen? And third, and just as important from my perspective, is understanding the circumstance or the environment that the job is all about. And when I talk about circumstance and environment, I'm talking about who are they going to interact with? What kind of characteristic is it going to take for them to move this along in this situation? I've had the pleasure of working at a number of companies. Every company is different, and that's okay. You have to figure out, as you begin to think about who you want, what is the job like that the individual is going to work in? Is this an open environment? Is this a closed environment? Is this a hierarchical environment? Is this a bureaucratical environment? Is this an entrepreneurial environment? And what do you want to make it be before you begin doing that? And whether it is talking about the assessment tool or whether it's talking about how you go about interviewing, that preparation step is so important, and the time spent and clarifying that among all of the individuals that are going to touch the person. So if a person's going to go through a 3 or 4 or 5 interview step, all of those interviewers have to be aligned with understanding what you're talking about. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, I think that is right on play. And without doing those kinds of things, taking these kinds of steps, who knows? Who knows how effective your decision making is going to be after you have interviewed the individual, or even after you've assessed the individual, if you haven't done this kind of thoughtful preparation. So, one thing that I really wanted to stress today is the importance of looking at this information, not only around doing an effective assessment, but also around just ensuring that your interviews are on target, that you have a sense of indeed what your needs are, very specific needs are in recruiting, in interviewing, in selecting, and developing, etc. Doug was speaking very well to that first bullet, the organization and strategic intent. Where are we going? Not only where are we now, but where are we going? And what kind of people is it going? What kinds of people are required to get us there? Core success characteristics. Frequently, I have come across organizations who haven't looked at these core success characteristics for a long period of time. It's difficult sometimes to find the time and people resources to do it, but so important. We had, just prior to the situation that we're going to be talking about at Famous Footwear, we had redefined the core success characteristics for Brown Shoe. And more recently, in the last few months, we've repeated that process because things have changed in a relatively short time span. The knowledge, skills, abilities associated with the position, those a lot of times are the things that might come to mind more readily when you read a job description. Very important, needs to be updated. But the situational characteristics that Doug was referencing are the kinds of things that we frequently forget. What is this person walking into? What is that team going to look like? What is the culture? What does that individual going to be challenged with in terms of their direct report strengths and opportunities? What is their peer group going to look like? What are some issues there? And in the interview impressions to date, I think when you're doing an assessment, it's very important. Sometimes I get resistance on this, but it's very important to know how this individual has been interviewing. What are the impressions that people have been achieving as a result of those interviews? So we can look at the data to help figure out why. Selecting the appropriate tools, we select based on the information that we have about your core success characteristics. We look for those tools that indeed are objective in terms of response and interpretation, reliable. They bring the appropriate amount of reliability. So if you answer items a certain way on one day, 6 months from now, you're going to see that same kind of performance. Validity. Do the measures, does this particular scale, whatever the case might be, does it truly predict the kind of behavior we're interested in? So all the tools that we utilize, and any good assessor would utilize, have established over time that predictive value and relate to success on the job in the way we just discussed. We would ensure that. Different kinds of tools, you'll see many domains assessed in the kind of evaluation we're talking about today. So we have problem solving, cognitive ability kinds of measures. Problem solving could be of different types. How does this person address a problem? What do their thought processes look like under pressure? Can a person step back and think about things more abstractly? Do they appreciate complexity? Can they assume a strategic posture? Can they think out of the box and generate creative ideas? Do they assess the merits of those ideas? Those are some of the kinds of things that we start to think about when we look at problem-solving data, and we further interpret them by looking at some of this other kind of information as well. The leadership style and knowledge, we have tools that we use, and any good assessor would use, to call out what a person's preferred style is, what their philosophy is, what they strive to do. Specialized knowledge and skill would be in such areas maybe as sales knowledge, knowledge of effective selling techniques, spatial reasoning, etc. personality, this is really the behavioral component of the assessment. I think about the first three in some ways as at this particular point in time, the can-do part of the assessment, where the personality measures reflect more the will-do part of the assessment. How does the individual get their work done? How do they form relationships, etc. And the interest, I think, the data as well as common sense would suggest that we tend to do things well and gravitate to things that we enjoy. So oftentimes you'll see those kinds of measures involved as well. That kind of brings us up to an application, and rather than to talk in generalities about some of the things that Doug has done at Brown Shoe around effective selection processes, I thought it might be helpful to speak to a pretty compelling situation. And just to kind of kick it off, Doug, every time I think about this, it kind of takes my breath away. Doug had been in his position for, was it less than a year?
Just about a year.
About a year. And what, as the head of HR at Famous Footwear, and what he found himself in was the existing status situation you see up there. Out of the 7 senior team members, there were 4 open spots. And the 4 open spots were the president. There was no head of merchandising. There was no head of stores. And there was no marketing leadership.
Just to comment, if you look at that, for those of you who know anything about retail, all of us nice support people were in place. None of the core business, go ahead. It was an interesting time.
It was very interesting. And they were all pulling together, doing their very best to provide that leadership. Phenomenal. And
Okay. Can we talk a little
go
bit?
ahead and yes.
I'll see if I can remember how bad Famous was 2 years ago, so I can give you an illustration. A little bit about the history of the company so you have some sense to it. Famous Footwear, 1,000-store chain with stores nationally, so it's got a nice presence, good placement in the country. Probably needs 2,000 stores to maximize its presentation to its targeted customer. It had lost its targeted customer, didn't know who its targeted customer was any longer. That was reflected in continual diminishing sales, continual diminishing profit levels, continual diminishing customer counts in stores where every store counts their customers. So the business process, when you looked at it, was suspect. The platform was suspect. Could we revitalize an organization that at one point was an industry leader, in fact, an industry inventor in its field? In addition to that, there were other very substantial business problems. An increased aged inventory. For those of you who know something about retail, that meant when you went to our stores, we had shoes that were 3 and 4 years old, okay? Most people don't want to buy shoes that are 3 and 4 years old. So those shoes continue to get older because we kept believing that we could get value for that individual shoe. So the platform was burning. The people that were in the company tended to be people who had been hired early on and grew up in the company, did not know anything else other than Famous Footwear, and in many cases didn't know anything else than Madison, Wisconsin. How many people here have been to Madison, Wisconsin? Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, it's a beautiful place, very middle America. We had stores in California and in New York, and those stores were screaming that their customers didn't know what we were trying to tell them. So the platform was burning. The current president at the time had been, for all intents and purposes, the founder of the company. He had been with the company, he had changed the company 3 times, and he knew that change was needed, and he just said, I am exhausted. I've changed this company 3 times. I want out. A lot of loyalty was focused into him, and he was leaving. He was leaving before he left. for those of you who have worked with top management change, his mind was, after he hired me, it was, this may be the last thing I decide to do, and for the next year I'm going to coast, which is not the way he would have put it, but that's, in practicality, that's what happened. So we were looking at a situation which Famous does 60% of Brown Shoe's volume. The demise of Famous would have meant the demise of Brown Shoe. Okay? Chairman came and said, I've got to chart a new course. It's very important to the organization to make changes. It's very important that we make the right kind of changes. And guess what? I have some ideas, but I don't know what those changes need to be. We've got to find people that can help direct this company, lead this company to a new platform, a new way of doing business. Okay. Questions about the platform and the change? Can I answer anything so that you knew, you have an understanding of what was going on? I guess I must have explained it well. Good. Can you all hear me? I know my voice is soft. Okay. So, you also, the chairman, besides the fact that he wanted to change Famous, he also recognized that the synergy that was available throughout the Brown organization, where we have great wholesale divisions in Naturalizer and in Brown Shoe, which includes Cluster Brown, Lifestride, Carlos, Connie, a bunch of other names that you would recognize. Realize that if the companies could combine in the way they do what they do, we could have a wonderful opportunity for growing increased profit at Brown Shoe, not just at Famous Footwear. Third, he took a look and said, we need to focus particularly on the core businesses. Doug, you're in a support role. Marty Lang, who was with the company for 8 years, was the chief financial officer. Jim Rowe had been with the company for over 20 years and had good real estate background, but we need to find the core positions. So that's where we started. When we say here on this slide that we were treading water, the businesses, as I've already discussed, was diminishing. We were treading water in that we were opening 50 stores, 60 stores a year, closing 60 stores a year. We were watching our competitors begin to eat our lunch. Shoe Carnival, Rack Room, and certainly stores like Kohl's were beginning to pick up our customers. Kohl's staffed their entire department by people who used to work at Famous at one stage. So we were being raided. People didn't want to work for us because the feeling in the company was that we were not going to be successful. The second tier, the vice presidential level, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we replaced 6 out of the 13 in the year prior to this. We were already beginning the leadership transformation from November of 2000 by beginning at the middle layer, where we needed to add expertise at a vice presidential level that could influence the direction of the company through good practical understanding of their job functions. So we had already begun doing that. When we talk about short-term VP groups, besides going out and finding people, we also moved people up in the organization that solidified the organization from a leadership standpoint. Who do we need to look to as we begin to lose the core executive staff? As we began to lose the senior merchant, the senior marketing person, and the senior head of stores, who can they look towards to get day-to-day direction on what they had to do?
And I remember, I believe, Doug, that you had 2 VP groups in which every single vice president had less than a 6-month tenure in their role.
At one point.
So 2 of the core business areas just...
It was a lot of fun. Okay. So we had four senior jobs. We had the president's job, the GMM or chief merchant's job. We had the head of stores, 1,000 stores, and we had the head of marketing. Okay, I'll go backwards. There was no marketing platform. No marketing platform. We had lost our market. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know who we were. We had no targeted audience. We didn't know what was happening. Okay. In the stores were doing their own thing based upon what region you were in. It was totally diffused with an overburdened, here are 17 pages of what you have to do this week. Okay? And this is literal, 17 pages of instructions of which they would get and they would ignore. as you might think. The merchandising direction was totally confused. We didn't know who we were trying to get. Our potential partners were telling us, we don't like partnering with you. Okay, you are poor partners. Nike, Reebok, New Balance, Nine West, Lugs, you name it. I called them all. They all told me the same thing. You guys are poor. That's my New York coming out. You guys are poor partners, and we don't like doing business with you. Okay? Obviously, the head, where are we going to establish direction? How are we going to establish direction? Now, the difficulty when you start recruiting for 4 new people all at the same time is that certainly the world would say, well, get the president first, and he could help get everybody else, and he could help get the process everybody else. I had Ron, the chairman, and I had 2 different beliefs. One is that we couldn't wait, okay? We had 4, let me say it again, 4 jobs. We couldn't wait to go through the process to get the president first, then the GMM, then the head of stores, and then the head of marketing. We had to put a full court press on to get all 4 jobs. Second, if in fact you believed in what you wanted the organization to be, what the organization could be, and you believed in the processes that you were setting up to do the selection, and in this case, a heavy reliance on assessment processes, you would be selecting people that would demonstrate the teamwork abilities, the collaborative abilities that would make them successful. Okay? The order of hire went this way, by chance. GMM, head of marketing, president, and the head of stores. The head of stores, this Saturday, the president, Joe Wood, reminded me he thought he had an opportunity to pick his head of stores because he was hired on Friday. On Saturday, he got to meet his head of stores, who he figured out halfway through the conversation had already been hired, but he didn't know it yet. Okay? And that is the truth. He also said to a number of national sales managers, we were out at a dinner, that he could have brought in top-level head of store people. But when he looks back, the true top-level head of store person was the person he ended up with, who was John Mazur, because that person collaborates in a teamwork effort with the 3 other people that were hired at the same time. So that's, when I say 4 people, those are the 4 that we had to look for. Second to that is the assessment process was critical to have a good understanding of each of these individuals. Preferring a structured interview process when you don't have enough interviewers. In many cases, it was the CFO, myself, and the chairman, which in my mind is not enough to have conversation at a presidential level and a chief merchant. That's all I had available to me. And I had the good graces of Bob Lefton and Claire Bramlet to help talk to these individuals, but also to apply directly into the assessment work so that we understood the individuals that we were looking for. Again, with the need to have people that were going to be collaborative. How many people here know anything about retail? Okay. Would you suggest that in retail there are a lot of people who have egos that prevent them from being collaborative, particularly at the high level? Okay. I've been in retail 26 years. I've worked in a variety of different organizations. There are times that those egos are needed, and you need egos that want to win, okay? In this case, we were looking for egos that wanted to win, but also we're very interested in hearing what other people had to say, balanced by curiosity, balanced by, you might have a better idea than I do, and if I really want to win, I want to hear what you have to say. Okay, so that was the balance that we went through. Here are, I'm not going to read off these slides to you. Here are the expectations for the senior executives. Claire, do you want to mention some of the assessment here?
I think when Doug's spoken is just so well in terms of the situation. You know, it comes to mind things like these people are going to have to hit the ground running. They're going to have to be very smart, very talented. They're going to have to be great leaders. They have these green people reporting into them. They're going to have to be great in terms of strategic thinking because of the directional issues, et cetera. So, you know, when you think through this, these are some of the expectations of them coming into the role. And things that when we looked at the assessment data, we paid a special attention to. Knowledge and understanding of their position, the expertise that they brought to their role was critical. Commit to work on a common mission and priorities and speaking a common language, that willingness to collaborate, the willingness to align their individual and team processes with company direction, and the collegial spirit, again, implied throughout what Doug just spoke to, and leveraging each other's strengths and experiences. And boy, have I seen that. You know, it's just amazing in terms of that group.
The process that we followed, some of you asked me earlier, what is the process that we followed? The process began with a screen, and that's a phone screen. And for senior executives, this phone screen process that I use is always on a weekend, or nearly always on a weekend. That was something of a challenge for the head of stores because my phone screen with him was out of his current home, which was on Guam. And I had to figure out that I had to interview him on the phone on Saturday because it was really Sunday. I was confusing to me. So the phone screen consists of really two elements for me. One is an establishment of the individual's credentials. If I don't have it in front of me, I want to establish it on the screen. If I do have it, I want to make sure that I got down what the credentials are. And the second part of the screen was having them ask questions. Okay? And that's it. I don't go into an interview process on a phone screen at a senior executive level. The reason I don't do that is that I want to put the onus on a senior executive to show the curiosity that's going to be natural for them to have in a senior executive job. If they're not prepared for the phone screen, then I don't want to spend time interviewing. Okay? I time that to be 1 hour to 2 hours on the telephone. Now, why the weekends? Well, I think common sense says weekends for the following reasons. They're not going to be interrupted. Okay, they have set time aside. If they're actively working, they're not going to be interrupted on the weekends. They've set time aside at home to do it or someplace that makes sense. 2, I can take as long as I want without worrying about feeding into their other appointments. If you talk to them during the week, they're going to think about their other appointments. Why not at night? I want full energy because I want to see them at their best, not at their worst. I want to hear when they're asking questions, when they're able to think through what they have to do. And finally, and I know this is manipulative, or as Ron Fromm likes to say, orchestrated, I also want to know that they have enough commitment to realize in a retail world that we're open 7 days a week, and that a senior executive's job doesn't end at Friday at 5. And I want to hear that from the beginning. So the phone screen is process 1. It's 1 hour to 2 hours, depending on the candidate. 2, we go into a structured interview process. When the candidate comes in, the interviewers, based on what we talked about, the prep earlier, go through a structured interview, which means that each of the interviewers knows what they're looking for and has a series of questions that they're going to ask to get to that information. I do not want to show interlap between different interviewers. I don't want the same interview time and time again based on a senior executive facing another executive. That's followed by a collection of the senior executives talking about what they learned in their interview process. Based on that information, with the pre-information that I've already shared with Claire concerning what we're looking for, we then share what we think we've heard and what we think we haven't heard, okay? Where the person might be strong, where the person might be weak, and we look for validation in terms of the assessment process. So not only is all that good data about what the job is, what the company is, and what the circumstance is, we now feed it with what we think this person might be all about, and where we think there might be areas of need and where there may be areas of development and there may be areas of strength.
And
Go ahead.
I was going to say, sometimes we confirm it, and sometimes we don't. And when we don't, then Doug and I will spend a certain amount of time talking through whys, what might be the reasons for those perceptions.
And recognizing, by the way, fundamentally, that we want to play to strengths. And we all have weaknesses. Claire and I were laughing this morning. Neither she nor I like to stand in front of a group. I would much rather sit at this table and ask you questions. That's my preferred style, okay? Not standing in front of talking to you. This is, to me, not a strength. Asking questions is a strength, okay? That's okay. I don't have to do this very often. I do have to ask a lot of questions. So it's good that I have strength in that area. So we go through that. She then takes the assessment, goes through looking through the psychometrics that she uses to determine what the individual has, what matches our questions, what doesn't, and the individual comes back for a second interview. And that second interview is tuned into their strengths and their weaknesses. And in particular, when we get to the weaknesses, what they might be doing to overcome those. All of us who have grown up with weaknesses know there are ways we can act to take care of those so they don't show up, either handing it off or some process individually that we have taken. So the second group of interviews follow the good assessment data that we have.
Doug and I sat down in December of 2009 with the status that we presented earlier and came up with a plan. Obviously, an intensified effort to recruit and interview exceptional talent. He gave himself a 60-day time span there to get the 4 people in place. Pretty aggressive. And I think that the kinds of skills and characteristics that were emphasized in the assessment made good sense based on what he said today. And we also put together a well-defined acclimation process. So when these 4 new individuals were coming in, then what? We wanted to make sure that they were going to be supported and that they were going to be successful.
The one item that's not on that slide that I always ask you at the end about the individual, because as you hire people, and somebody talked about it earlier with me, what you do need to know is what is this person's capacity to learn. Okay, because you're not hiring a person who is going to be here and always be here. What you want to know is what is their ability to grow.
Exactly.
And that's always the end question that I consistently ask.
Very true.
Tell me what that individual's ability to get better is.
That's very true. And Doug does a fine job, too, of talking through how to capitalize on the individual's strengths, which I think sometimes people overlook when they think about assessment data. I don't need to really read this to you, but we're starting to move now into what we see as the results of, quote, doing the right thing. Taking the time to put these thoughtful processes into place, taking the time to do the kind of pre-work that Doug did, taking the time to do a good assessment, to talk it through, and to do the follow-up interviews around that assessment. You see here in terms of the team profile, and I really have never seen over the course of my career a more impressive senior team. They came together quickly. I think it had a lot to do with no egos. It's amazing. Their talent level is so high, and their willingness to work together and respect one another is so strong. They're very results-oriented. They care very much about relationships. They're very collaborative. Creativity is the hallmark. The appreciation for change, the flexibility, tremendous. In terms of, I thought this was kind of interesting. When I'm preparing for today, I compared the data we had on the previous team, the team that was in place before Doug Koch joined the organization, and the team that's in place today. So if you look at this graph up here, the top blue line represents the performance on our tools of the team that is now in place. The red line is the previous team. It wasn't a bad team in terms of their abilities. By definition, they're above the 50th percentile on most measures. So they're good. But what you see here in terms of the top line is a great group. In terms of their mental alertness in verbal and quantitative areas, their speed of assimilating information, their critical thinking, their thought processes, their numerical critical thinking or their quantitative analytical skills as a group, they're tremendous in terms of working with data, really challenging one another. very strategic in their posture, wonderful talents. In addition, you can see where they fell out on the leadership measures. This represents to me a different culture, that middle score there. But from a general understanding of best practices leading people, tremendous improvement in terms of their willingness to involve people while challenging them. A big bump up, about the same in terms of the clarification of direction and structure, etc. Very importantly, too,
Okay, if we can talk.
business results.
So, okay, why do this? Okay. For those of us who work in HR, it's a lot of fun, okay? But in the end of the day, I'm not living in Madison, Wisconsin to have fun. I'm living in Madison, Wisconsin so that we can make a business happen and hopefully enrich a lot of people. So here are some business results after a year and a half of doing it, and I think they're pretty impressive, and I'll try to go down why I think each of these business results are impressive. The first one we go to is the shortage in the store. Why shortage first? Because basically you're looking for people who can manage. And shrink, shortage, whatever you want to talk about, is a management problem. And if you take a look at the reduction from about $12 million to about $6 million, a 0.6% shrink is benchmarked across our industry extremely well, and it talks to people who can manage. Purchase ratio. Purchase ratio talks to, now can we begin to lead? When we talk in terms of leading, I'm thinking in terms of, can we put together a strategic market plan that talks to the customer, that gets the customer to think about buying more than that one pair of shoe that she came in for that day. And I say she because our target customer is a she. And if you take a look here, what you see is an increase from 18% as the former senior management team left to we're over 22% based upon our back-to-school performance. So there has been increased purchase ratio based upon the strategic decisions that the leadership team made in reaching out to the customer. Product margin. I mentioned earlier our poor relationship with our partners in the business, whether it be Nike, New Balance, Skechers, Lugs, Nunn-Bush, whoever you want to talk to. We need to make money on the products that we sell. At our worst, in our product cycle, is that we are buying today for next year at this time. I'm sure you're aware of that. Our product cycle bottomed out in 2001 as the team started because they were left with the merchandise from the team previously. But if you take a look today, we're up almost to a 44% gross margin, gross profit level, which is, again, industry standard. We sacrificed none of that profit margin during back to school. We all know where the economy is today. We're proud of the fact that our business was ahead, our customer count was ahead, and our profit margin for the back to school period of time was better than it was last year at this time. I talked earlier about aged inventory. Our customer wants fresh inventory. And as you can see there, over a period of time, through discipline, through leadership, through understanding the relationship of our merchandise and the way we need to buy it, our investment, my GMM, Rick Orsick, is the best investment GMM that I've ever worked with. And the difference, what I mean by that is that he takes a look at how he is going to invest his dollars based on categories, based upon vendor positions, based upon location in the store, and places it. I don't claim that he is the best product selector. That's not what he wants to do. He wants to look at investment. And in looking at our aged inventory, what he has been able to do significantly over the 2 years, year and a half that he's been there, is change where our inventory is invested to ensure that it's constantly fresh. So much so that September of this year, which is always a slow time for our business, we are actually ahead in September, which means our customers that shopped us in back to school, who usually don't come back in September, are coming back because they are seeing new product. A slide near and dear to my heart. Looking at cash. Cash is where it is at. You will see that there was an immediate improvement in 2001, but a much better improvement and a surprising improvement in 2002 as we managed the business better. You'll see a slight dip in 2003 and where our expectations are in 2003. That is because we are already taking the money that we knew we would earn and investing it back into the business. We are investing in two areas. The two investments are marketing. We're increasing our marketing presence or our sales promotion presence, the way I like to talk it. And the second area, talent. Okay? That's where we're investing because we want to sustain our business over a period of time. Marketing, so we have the platform going forward, and people, so that we have the health of the organization going forward.
I think that's very impressive. You know, we've talked about the results in terms of the practices that we put in place with regard to the business results, with regard to what the team looks like, their characteristics. In addition, how do people feel? How do they feel about one another on that team? How do people feel about them in the organization? Their served multi-rater feedback, or their 360 feedback, is consistently in the top quartile, whether it be perceptions from their direct reports, their peers, or their boss. The team comments are unbelievably positive. When I meet with them in coaching and their 360 process, they say glowing things about one another. And, you know, Doug hears similar kinds of comments as well.
What I would offer up to from a retention standpoint, in a year and a half at Famous Footwear, at the leadership level, which we identify as 60 people in the company, which includes the senior executives, the vice presidents, and the director level individuals, the highly, what I would consider the compensated individuals. In the year and a half, we have lost, out of those 60, we've lost 4 people. We've terminated 2, we've forced 1 out, and 1 left for Europe to join her husband. So, and that's all we have lost in terms of as compared to years before, where our standard turnover at that level was 20 to 25%.
Well, our concluding comment really has to do with underscoring how the knowledge of your need, being very careful and coming to the understanding of what that need is, situationally, in terms of the organizational intent, in terms of the individual position, and then applying very focused processes equals the best chance of a successful selection, or really increasing your odds of making wonderful selection decisions. Questions?
Please ask questions. Yes, sir.
How do you objectively determine the success factor? I mean, so much of that is driven by the individual in that position and their preferences.
The success factors that we use for Famous Footwear and for Brown Shoe are the same, okay? But this will take a few minutes for me to answer, and I hope I get to it. Objective, I'm not sure that there is an objective way. It is very subjective, and it's very, through a lot of dialogue. We are going through the process today of changing our success factors because we have better knowledge of the organization. It has been a 4-month process, okay? It began with taking a look at what we had, talking to the interviewers, talking to the top executives in the company, flowing it down to the next leadership level for them to have a look at it, flowing it back to the assessment people to say, can you assess for that? Flowing it back to the leadership level. So we have spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of thought process around getting those right and getting those so that they can be measured and getting those so that they can be aspirational to what we want to be in 2 to 3 years. Then, and there's some HR people here, what the HR people are doing is taking those success factors and flowing them down the organization so that if we began at the senior executive level, what are the behavioral elements that would then be needed at the next level? What do they look like at the level below that? What do they look like at the level below that? so that we are feeding the system towards that long goal. It is very much a difficult process. It is a process of discovery, and I think it's also an organizational changing process, transformation process, because it gets senior level people to debate what they're really looking for in terms of what they want in 3 years, in terms of individuals.
Did you do strictly an internal analysis, or did you go do external analysis in terms of other industries, other successful corporations and behavioral traits to see?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Did you do strictly an internal analysis in terms of identifying those success factors, or did you go external also to other industries or other retailers and see that were successful and compare them?
It's a combination, and we work together. We collaborate in terms of those characteristics because we do bring our industry experience to bear so that we can challenge people's thinking and call out some things that they might be overlooking and work together. We go back and forth too in terms of their, being very clear about our wording, what they represent.
The other thing that I'll add, just to help, is that those success factors are so important to the culture of the organization that we use them in the professional development reviews, not in the performance reviews, but in the professional development reviews and in the 360 feedback that executives go through. So it is inculcated into the entire way we operate, the way we think. So a 4-month process to get these right is time well spent because it's going to click into everything that is part of the fabric of the organization going forward.
And it's an exciting time at Brown Shoe.
It is.
And one final follow-up question.
Sure.
So, I mean, there's kind of a situation you were dealing with, and it would seem like you're looking for certain success factors, but then now as things are changing, you said you're reevaluating those success factors.
We were in a platform
Are those-
burning situation.
I mean, it's a different situation now, so how do you?
Right.
We were in a platform that was burning. Okay, that's the only way to describe it. We were in survival mode. The company is now in growth mode. When these people started, the stock price was $13. The stock price today is $32 or almost $33. Okay, it's a year and a half. We are in a growth investment mode. And what we're looking for is what do we need to have in terms of leadership at the next level, at the next for the next 10, 15 years. What we did, and one of the things I can't emphasize enough, is that when we assess people, I'm not talking too much, assess people here, the last question always has to be, what is the capacity to learn and change? We saw good people that we frankly rejected because they were set in their ways and they were not interested in their own personal professional development. They were not curious enough to develop later on.
Right. I mean, some of the factors we looked at, there was a heading up there called flexibility, but that's flexibility in thinking, flexibility in behavior, flexibility in terms of teamwork, flexibility in terms of being able to tolerate some ambiguity so that you can create. So those are the things that we were thinking about, and because of Doug's foresight, we put a lot of emphasis on a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Thanks. We answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
You had mentioned that you asked the question often of what for a candidate to identify their weaknesses and how they overcome them. And not in my current team, but how important is that? We've all had that candidate who said, I don't have any weaknesses in business.
Yes.
And to me, that's a huge red flag of their capacity to learn.
Yes.
You just answered it. If somebody says they don't have any weaknesses, then they don't know themselves, or they're trying to sell themselves. And if they're not mature enough to have figured out how to talk about what their weaknesses are, that's a red flag. And more importantly, if you're good at interviewing, you can get underneath that way of they're talking about it. If you can establish what they do about it, that's important.
And we'll too talk about the assessment data relative to that call out. But interviewing them myself, I have a lot of frustration when I experience someone who has great talent, but they surface those kinds of responses, and I immediately look at that test data and try to understand why is that.
My experience then is the team note sometimes when I met this whole person who says, but look at their credentials, they were just having, and to me that's outweighs, it's a big red flag. So
Absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of talking about what you want in the company and the circumstance, which has nothing to do with the CV that you have in front of you. It's just there's a lot of good credentials out there, and they're good for different companies. Who I would hire for this company is different who I'd hire for the Sports Authority, Macy's, American Retail Group. This was a different situation. Yes, sir.
When you hired your four core people, and I'm assuming because one of the things I was impressed with was that you had to have them ask you a lot of questions. So in other words, my guess is that you were asking them more about what their interests would be in the company, where they would take the company. Once you hired those four people, what was it that you used to get them cohesive? Because no matter how you're going to look at it, there's still going to be that different talents going to try to get everybody on one vision or one wow. What were the methods that you used to get everyone together?
We had a year and a half long onboarding process that was established that talked to specific events. But we can talk later. Maybe that's another conversation at some time. But it was a year-long, pre-planned, and included the sharing of who you were. Okay? Included 360 feedback. Included team-building exercises that surfaced conflict, which you want conflict, because you want people to disagree in the right setting, and surfaced the ability to talk about how people felt about each other.
Because of this particular circumstance, we put a lot of emphasis on elevating their candor levels and learning how to provide great feedback to one another.
So they fed off each other.
Exactly.
That's a good
And
question.
you know, when that December meeting that we had, and we talked through what we were going to try to accomplish over the next 60 days. In addition, that's the day we put into place this acclimation process and committed to what we were going to do after those 60 days for the next year and a half.
So each person's goal in the interview probably wasn't the same, but you basically merged all their goals into one. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I know Browning had their own goal, but if I'm interviewing with you, I'm going to say, well, this would be my goal if I'm going to reach that way. Another person will say, this would be my goal if I'm going to do this. Then all of a sudden, they all came to one goal.
All of them wanted to win. Okay. All of them wanted to win
Absolutely.
collaboratively.
Yes.
Okay. Each of them had some separate goals, but the two that I would think right offhand, they all wanted to win. They wanted to be the best, but they wanted to be the best in a collaborative effort. They didn't want to run ahead of everybody in the team. They weren't looking. The GMM wasn't saying, well, I am the king and I want everybody else to be my servants. Okay. The reason I say that is those of you who know GMMs.
He's phenomenal. He truly is. And the group is very collaborative. So the kinds of goals they surfaced were collaborative in nature and very results oriented.
And to help, I didn't catch your name, but to help with your question on the CV, just to help, Rick Orsick has an MBA from the University of Chicago. He was 6 or 7 years in Marshall Fields, about the same time at Burdines, where he started their planning allocation process. He was the chief merchant at a company in Canada and the chief merchant at Chaco up in Green Bay. Those people that fit in can be found, okay? And that's the point. You look for the right person, and that includes whatever their background is. Okay.
To dovetail with that question, what have you done since that year-long acclimation process? What's your ongoing development?
Nothing substitutes for a candor, and you've got to help foster candor all the time, okay? Which, for those of us who work in HR, gives us the opportunity to be not the nice guy, okay? So if candor starts going low, it's my job to bring candor back in a Q format method that gets people to talk about what they're really thinking. Now, there are times that that's not easy. Besides that, there is structured team-building exercises 4 times a year for the group. And part of that process is talking about the process of working together. And that's ongoing.
And then there are individual discussions ongoing, 360 feedback ongoing. They're going to be giving each other feedback from their 360 results very soon. They're going to be giving feedback to their president very soon. In October.
That comes up 2 times a year. Am I right? Okay. We're back on.
Okay, we have a couple things to wrap up, but before we do, we might thank Doug and Claire for the presentation. In your folder, you'll find a feedback form. It's very important to us to get feedback from you about these briefings. And while you're doing that, we have a drawing for a couple of things for you to take with you. We have all your names in this. The first drawing is for a book, correct? Reach way down in there. Don Lentz. Okay, Don, and you'll receive a book, and the author of this book is right over here, Dr. Robert Levin. And secondly, for a leadership seminar. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. This is for a free assessment. Leo Ebel. There we go, Leo. You have that.
Thank you.
And with that, okay. If you could turn your feedback form back to, I believe, Angela in the back, we will have a pocket card that has some of these pointers on it for you to take with you. Thank you very much for your attendance today.
Great stuff. Yeah.